Foreword. Generally, an author's foreword may be regarded as a bit pretentious, depending on the circumstances of the story. For a fictional story, it would almost be appropriate. Thank you to my daughter Cindy for keeping her imagination open. Thank you to my wife for the countless cups of black coffee. Very James Patterson. For a non-fictional one, it might be a bit of a whining sheet, I think. Oh, woe is me, the stress of collecting public information and formatting it into several hundred paragraphs has taken my sanity from me. That kind of thing. I haven't done so many of these, as my other collections of events and testimonies have spoken mostly for themselves, depending on how much historical context I sneak into the introduction. I do this because I love the mystery, the intrigue, and the campfire-esque quality these accounts and journals exhibit. Whether or not I believe in them, it doesn't matter. There's just something I think should be heard in them, that's all. This time I thought it'd be a nice piece to set the right tone for this particular account. My name is Sam, and my last name is Geist. I worked for 3 years in the Ribbons County Library as an archivist, and I never went to college. I don't sleep a lot, but mostly because I think it's sort of fun. This story comes from a moldy old file box I found tucked away in a mop closet in the Ribbons County Public Library. I remember it was late night when I'd caught myself digging through the piles of papers and a manila folder. Finally, after hauling it down the smoke-stained hallway and into my office, I'd flipped through 5 or 6 papers before the box yielded a stale yellow packet. As the text pressed into the frontal page indicated, I was looking at a report and an affidavit from the Ribbons County Police Department. It was bare bones, just enough to get across that Mr. Thornhill had suffered from harassment and intimidation from somebody or, in hindsight, something on the night of October 30th, 1976. Mr. Thornhill, joined by his wife and son, had only moved to a shabby little den a mile from town the day before. Apparently, it hadn't taken long for the town's stranger side to peek into their lives. Nothing appeared to come of it initially, just a small report in the bottom of a file box. Curiosity must have gotten the better of me, as I couldn't help but ask around the sheriff's office come morning. It was purely a hunch, but it had been so long since I found the Pool House journals, and I was hungry for another spooky story. I got an address from the ever-sweet Miss Collins at the front counter, and found myself driving to the burbs somewhere in the evening. I found the new Thornhill residence there, with a solemn old man greeting me at the door. Mr. Thornhill hadn't been who I imagined, being more bookish-looking than the men I was accustomed to seeing around town. Not a hint of stubble on his face, a pair of pristine black glasses on the crook of his nose, and his snow-white hair combed to the side of his head as if it had never left the 60s. He had me at the table within 5 minutes, shooting off notes about his grandson and his battling average on the Wombats Little League team that season. It seemed a shameful thing in retrospect to blindside him with a report. Mr. Thornhill clamped up as the question sprung from me, and I was afraid he'd shut down and throw me out. Maybe I hit the right note, but he didn't shut the door on me completely. Instead, he asked that I give him time to write. This was strange, as I'd never met a subject of my posts before, let alone been offered a written account from the horse's mouth. A week after, I received a call and excitedly came by a second time to pick up a hefty few pages from Mr. Thornhill's own hand. That night, I read them until the sun came up. I happened to live in the woods just a few miles west of the location talked about in the report, and after reading the packet in its entirety, I've never looked at those trees the same. Between the double-wide trailers and the outskirts of the burbs, when asphalt roads turned to dirt ones, I feel it there, when the sun gets low. When it's dark, when the moon comes up over the tops of the pines, there's a tinge of hell there now. I'll always look twice when I see a sewer drain, or even a simple office vent. I can feel it every time I look there into the ink-colored space between every branch, and this testimony is the reason that childhood fear of the night has crept back into my life. Here's to hoping that the years after poor Mr. Thornhill's terrible weekend vanquished whatever sat on him those nights in '76. Hoping that maybe my uneasiness in those wooded hills is just a memory of a memory. Samuel Geist, documentarian and professional sweaty library nerd. The following is Mr. Thornhill's own writing, his own account. Please consider it carefully and with a hint of grace, fit for an old, honest man. I think the best place to start would be the crash. We were 15 miles out from Winewick, I think. It's hard to remember. What comes back to my mind was the road. God, the dirt and rocks kicking up and smacking the undercarriage kept the car constantly loud. The forest on either side was like two walls of green. No gap went over a foot without another huge pine growing behind the first. My wife sat in the passenger side of the grisly old Chevy pickup whilst my son sat in the back behind me. Initially, it was supposed to have been a nice little drive on a local road to the new house. Something her mother had mentioned on the phone yesterday. She thought it'd be nice, and Janice was in a big hurry to feel as local as possible, though I was in no hurry at all. I mean, the boy started at the elementary school the next day, and I still hadn't figured out what bus to get him on. She hadn't found a job, and I wouldn't be starting work at the firm in Portland for another 4 days. I was scared shitless that we were playing stupid with the entire thing, and that this had all been a big mistake. Shit, I'm not too sure where I stand on it even now. But her mother had told her about the scenic little road that cuts into town from just past Eugene, and she didn't want to come in feeling like a tourist. But I humoured her, as I always do. She always smiles so much when I play into the cute little ideas she gets, and I'm a sucker for it every time. That's who she married. An idiot. Maybe the road wasn't so bad. Maybe I'm just being a big Nancy about the whole thing. But it was loud before we found it. That's when I saw the taillights straight out down the road, staring back through the windshield like eyes in the dark. The dust and dirt kicked up by our tires danced in the beam of our headlights as I slowed our 35 miles per hour to a 10. The vehicle didn't move, and the beam of yellow light trickled down the rocks as we slowly crept forward. That's when the rusted back bumper slunk out of the dark, and the bed of the truck followed it, till the vague frame of the cab was just beyond visible. I'd stopped, and Janice had lightly punched my knee, kicking her head up and gesturing to the truck. Keep in mind, I'd already been at my wit's end 10 miles back where we'd come from, so I didn't take the assignment without what amounted to a few angry grunts. Needless to say, I hesitantly opened the door to the Chevy and heard her turn and distract our son, who was excitedly stirring now that he'd noticed we'd stopped the drive. As she asked him for a game of rock, paper, scissors, I felt myself nervously re-tucking the waist of my shirt under my belt as I shut the door and took the first few steps toward the truck. The brush was buzzing with crickets as I neared the bed of the truck, and the sun had now completed its descent back behind the horizon. I was startled, sure, but not expecting any trouble in the small walk to the window of the truck. I picked up speed and reached the driver's side before stepping back. I saw the tree first, still standing strong with the lip of the hood curled and bent around its trunk like a piece of tinfoil. I saw the front of the frame run mangled up to the windshield. which had burst into 1,000 shards of speckled glass. I leaned in, my breath held in the back of my throat as I made out the outline of a figure in the front seat. The brim of his cap hung sideways against the steering wheel, while the meat surrounding the head was clinging wetly to a huge stone. The man inside was dead. His arms hung limp around the rock. His fingers were still curled tight around the sides of it like they'd failed to pull it off his chest. Bits of slimy red matter dripped down onto the collar of his denim jacket, turning the blue into a horrible dark purple. I saw that his shirt had been torn out. Ribbons of shredded flannel lightly covered a large hole in his breast. The skin had been gutted, and a circle of teeth marks took my mind to scary places, as did the strange yellow mucus oozing around the wound. Maybe I'd felt sick. I don't remember. What I do, though, is gripping the handle of the car door tightly before immediately jumping in and letting out that bated breath. Janice turned to me like I'd asked her to find the TV remote, but must have gauged the situation better than I expected when she lightly ran an arm around the width of my shoulders. She asked what was wrong, and I told her that we needed the police as soon as possible. Maybe she thought I was joking, but when she let out a chuckle in disbelief, I slammed my hand down on the wheel hard. We were getting the police as soon as we got to town. We were getting the hell out of Dodge. She leaned back to her corner on the passenger side and told my son that everything was all right. He wasn't listening, though. I peered at him through the side mirror and saw his face pressed against his window, fog growing where his mouth met the glass. All three of us sat there quiet while the engine purred, my wife shooting me a look before we heard him pipe up from the back seat.
"Slinky Man, Mommy! Look, the Slinky Man!"
Neither of us spoke, but we shared a confused smirk before she reached back and clicked his seatbelt back into its slot. I started the car and bent the gas down till the debris on the road kicked up and pelted the bottom of the vehicle at the decibels unheard of before. I do realize now that that was the first sign of things to come. I can't pull out all the specifics from under the fluorescent bulbs in that tiny police station, but I remember Sheriff Grant and company being the kind of guys I'd only seen in spaghetti westerns. The sheriff himself was shorter, but his arms were packed with the kind of muscle that you'd see in a farmer or a prison inmate. I remember a scar running down the length of his neck and a handlebar mustache that could have fit perfectly on a Hell's Angel. There were few words in between my details from the crash, just a "yes sir" and a "no sir" and a "down on Links Road." They'd asked what the truck looked like, if I could describe the man's features at all. I told them they'd be hard-pressed to do so themselves, if they'd seen how rock and face had become one in the driver's seat of the beat-up pickup. "Any idea where the stone came from?" What the hell am I supposed to say? I have no idea. So we gave them what we could, and judging by the bags hung under Grant's eyes, I don't think he was happy to have to run out to that boony road and haul the vehicle back to town at midnight. Who could blame him? "You coming by for the fishing, or are you on your way out to Portland?" I explained that we were moving into a place in town. It was on Harrison Trail. Grant kind of scoffed, but not in a bad way. He just raised an eyebrow and finished writing down the information I'd given him. "Gonna be a lot of fun out there, fella. You were..." I told him my name was Ferris, and asked what he meant. "Shoot, Ferris, you got yourself settled into a far little branch of town. Might be the only house I could think of for miles in either direction." A deputy spoke up from his place at the water cooler.
"Nah, the Clark Castle's out a little further that way."
The sheriff brushed at his mustache.
"Oh yeah. Yes sir, they'll be your only neighbor."
Don't expect to borrow any sugar, though. That place has been boarded up since I was a kid. I asked why he thought I'd be having a lot of fun, and I heard the deputy laugh through his paper cup as he shut the office door behind him. Well, that patch of ground has been neat for the kids to explore and make spooky stories out of is all. Not just the kids, though, I guess. Started 10 or so years ago when an old man was out fishing and caught sight of the big guy. He must have noticed my crooked brow, because he patted me on the shoulder as he stood and held the door to his office open for me. It's nothing at all, Ferris. Just a story. Besides, it's not something people are scared of, they want to see him. Nobody has ever been in my office screaming about Bigfoot killing their dog or something. It's just a fun little story for kids and the old-timers. I asked him if he knew what had happened to the last tenants out there, or maybe the Clark Castle, but the sheriff didn't really remember. The den we'd moved into wasn't really on his radar, but it was probably a place yuppies had owned as a summer vacation home. The Clark Castle, though, he said, was an old story, not a particularly thrilling one, just a big house built and left alone sometime in the 30s. I remember rambling off a couple spitfire questions as he led me back to the lobby, a reassuring smile on his face and a pat on the back. Janice and Shane were there waiting for me. Shane's little head bustled into his mother's lap as he snored away. Janice held her head against the shoulder of the lobby chair, her own snores coming in soft and quiet. I woke them both, ushering them out the door with a gentle hand as I turned back to Grant, who called, "You're all invited to dinner at mine on Sunday, if you're willing, I mean. It'd be a nice way to pull out the welcome mat." I thanked him. Off we went then, out down a list of boulevards and streets I had to follow from a map made of red looping lines on a green landscape. In the dark, I'll add. Grant hadn't been joking about the run from this dingy old double wide to the heart of town. We must have gone through 13 miles of green mountainous hell before I pulled the brake ahead of the large cattle gate. I stepped out and got my key inside the lock, swinging the chain to the side and letting the gate creak open with an eerie screech. I pulled the car in and let the family out at the porch of our new country kingdom. Crickets and moths plagued the yard, the latter diving into my cheeks and forehead as I held little Shane in my arms and carried him inside. Janice had a bag tucked under her arm that she set aside as we shut the door behind us, and I let her set out to the bedroom whilst I got Shane in his pajamas. He would sleep with us that night, and I was relieved that at the very least the trailer had come furnished. A dusty floral couch and a Sears catalog dining table awaited us inside. The floor was shag, and I eyed suspicious black lumps that dotted the corners, having a hunch we'd walked into a roach graveyard. The bed was thankfully new, being a housewarming gift from Janice's mother. I had hardly a glance at it before I saw my pajama-clad wife slip beneath the covers and slide off into dreamland. Shane followed after, toothpaste foam still sticking to the corners of his mouth as he nuzzled in with her. I remember that as I flicked off the light switch, I saw the whole world fast asleep under those big, plush blankets. But I also remember the sweet, blissful taste of tobacco smoke as it danced against my tongue and slipped through my nostrils in a big cloud. Maybe I had promised to quit, but a couple of Marlboros weren't gonna hurt anyone. Besides, the relief of being alone with someone that was truly only mine was beautiful after a day like that. And then, under the blanket of stars, I found a small moment of peace. My dad had smoked too. He passed a long time now, but back then, tumors had only found purchase in his lungs. He had been a resident in a facility since before Janice and I had gotten married. I hadn't visited him much. Hell, I wouldn't let Shane even grace him with a hello on the phone. Some things are just best to be set in only a few words, and those are these. I wasn't terribly fond of my father. He was bad at being a parent, he was a drunk, and he wasted his life without me anywhere near him. I'd been terrified at the time, as the move got closer and closer, that maybe that man in the mirror I saw every day was starting to look a bit too much like his dad. I was only a year into the practice, but this firm was very well regarded, and I was nervous that I'd gone and moved us out here just to fumble the ball. In Arizona, I would handle public intoxication cases or small claims, but here I would be getting in an army that I wasn't so sure I was suited for. It was in those minutes outside, watching the smoke twist and swing through the air, that I noticed that the crickets had stopped chirping. I didn't know how long I'd stood there in the quiet, but the realization hit me, and I felt the thoughts of my father slip away. It felt darker out there. Without the breeze rustling the leaves together, the air almost felt weighted. I was alone, I was sure. So why could I hear someone breathing? It was there. Not close, not within 10 feet, but past the patchy grass and the fence line, I could hear it. Deep, soft breaths. They were hasty, and even though they weren't next to me, I could hear the wet tongue of something lashing in its mouth. I didn't finish that cigarette. Instead, I stood there and watched the black at the edge of the porch light, waiting to hear a pin drop. At a dog's butt if it meant I could head to bed and get some sleep without worrying even more. I opened the front door and stepped inside. In the saddlebag by the fridge, I had a small silver flashlight, packed in case the power wasn't on by the time we were ready to move in. Next to it, unbeknownst to me, was an empty box. Like the idiot I was, I kicked it whilst getting the bag and slipped on the shag carpet. I fell like a sack of grain onto the floor and felt my head knock onto the edge of the kitchen counter. Stars danced around my head, and I angrily got up and dug into the bag. Finding the stupid little light, I kicked the box into the living room and swore I was going to burn it. I opened the door and looked out there again, but the light slipped from my hand and bounced off the wooden slats with a clunk. Hanging from the banister below the porch roof was a snake. I nearly cursed, jumping back before letting the fact of the thing settle in. The snake was dead, its long, slender body wrapped in a snug knot around the wooden beam. Its pattern shone a string of diamonds down its back, and I looked up at the rattle as it hung down from the knot. Its yellow eyes were wide and hollow, its mouth open, and fangs showing like knives under the porch light. It swung limply as if it had only been stuck there a second before. The hairs on my arm stood on end, and I waited there like it might wake up and reach for me, but it didn't. Looking around, I saw nothing in the dark, and looking back now, the only reason I didn't switch on that flashlight and get a better look at the fence line was because I didn't want to see what was hiding in there. I grabbed the thing and undid the loop around the banister before turning inside and burying the snake beneath a pile of newspapers, tucking it in that damn empty box. I placed it next to the trash can and stepped back, my body frozen. Maybe it was the storm of tasks I'd have on my hands tomorrow, and maybe the drive had left me exhausted, but I refused to think about the snake longer than it took to walk over to the bedroom and shut the door behind me. I just couldn't take another straw on the back of that camel. Now, these years later, I know that I was truly the idiot I painted myself to be in my head. It was the snake that should have tipped me off. A diamondback strung up and tied to the porch like a big red sign on the highway. Stop. Don't go further. Turn back. Now I see the intent of it. It said, I'm here and can be as close as I want to be. When morning came, it was a sunrise greeted by my agitated yelling and whining. I'd overslept by an hour or two and had to ready Shane in whatever clothes I could find and run out to my car in my boxers and t-shirt. I got lost in a patch of houses at some point of the drive, but we reached the school at around 10 a.m. The poor kid had to hold his father's hand in the school lobby as I explained the situation to the ladies in front of the office. Other kids on their way to class pointed and chuckled at the funny old man standing in his underwear. I tried to make a joke out of it, but I'm not sure he thought it was very funny. He still waved back as he set off to his second grade classroom, but I'm sure he was beyond embarrassed. Walking back to the car, I locked eyes with anybody who dared stare. A dad's got to do what a dad's got to do. Unfortunately, Janice didn't seem to find it nearly as funny. When I got back, she was deeply annoyed to know her husband had embarrassed us as a family unit in front of the elementary school faculty, which I found even more funny in my delirious morning brain. Maybe I'd been a little too cynical when I spoke back. Hell, it hurts no one to admit it now. I was an outright arsehole. Looking back, I should have asked her not to leave. But the arguments had come like machine gun fire leading up to the move, and I know she was doing her best to tolerate me. It turned into a screaming match before either of us had even started a pot of coffee. In my hazy memory, I remember her looking so beautiful, with her hair in a bun, mouth curled into a snarl as she spat back at her know-it-all husband. If I could be there now, I would have slugged myself in the mouth and screamed at him to kiss her. Tell her you're just scared. But stoic heroes depend on silent jabs to fight their battles, not explanations. At the time, I was nearly at the end of my rope. I had just 3 days before I was due in Portland, and I had just spent a whole 24 hours in a car with a stream of questions flurrying out of her and Shane's mouths, and I was just tired. Tired of the failure I was sure I'd be in the office. Tired of the faces that depended on me looking back at mine with such blind confidence. Blissful ignorance to the tightrope we were walking all together. Stupidly led by the clown at the front. Me. She said she was going to her mother's, and that she'd pick up Shane tonight with her. She didn't want to be around me anymore with how much attitude I'd been pouring out the past few weeks, and I don't blame her. I sat at the tacky dining room table as she showered and dressed and packed a small bag.
Figure it out, Ferris. We want to be happy here. Please figure it out.
And then she left. I must have stayed on that porch for almost 4 hours after watching the car pull out of the driveway and through the gate. I felt the sun boil the surface of the yard as it slowly dripped down the face of the sky. By the time the afternoon had ended, I'd been heaving breaths through a wet pipe. Going cigarette after cigarette had mucked up my stomach and lungs, and I feigned ignorance to it as I pulled out another one. I was bored and hopeless, and felt a lot like I was the sorriest bastard on the planet. I saw the sun near the tops of the trees, and it stared out at the end of the yard as the blue deepened into a soft purple. I must have figured that I needed a distraction, and with the air cooling down to a nice 70 degrees in the sun's wake, how could I not take advantage? It was the perfect time for a pity walk, so I set out on our dusty road opposite of town and further into the trees. Wasn't this what it was for? Trees and animals and good, clean air. peace of mind and love for the in-between. A place you could really relax in. Retire, even. But between the trunks of the trees and the water bubbling somewhere out there fast and low in some crystalline pool, I didn't find any peace. All I could sense were the shambling, lazy footsteps of one moron trouncing through the brush. An arrow of large birds flew up above the green in a wide V, and I watched them go. The animals cawed and tweeted all around, seemingly unaware of my footsteps on the gravel. That would be around the time I noticed an old wooden post stuck into the shoulder of the path up ahead. I followed the jagged, rusty barbed wire strung between it and another post, and then another. The fence line led haggardly into a huge mass of growing vines and branches arched over a sun-bleached gate. The white paint turned yellow and faded long ago. The latch rusted into the wood like candle wax melting against glass, and I looked through the overgrowth to try and peek at what could be beyond. It wasn't doing any good. What I assumed were garden vines and bushes had long exploded into their own microcosm of green and completely engulfed the yard, keeping the property a secret from anything behind its gate. In an act bathed in childlike curiosity, I figured, of course, that I wouldn't let this old rose garden get the better of me. I smashed the rusty latch with a rock and pushed the gate open. The arms and neck were victim to what felt like hundreds of tiny scratches as I stretched through the tangled web of branches. The worst of it gave way with a little more effort than I thought reasonable, and I stumbled out of the thicket and onto a small stone pathway. Looking up, the looming face of a faded blue house stared down at me. The crest of the roof bent inward like the dip in the McDonald's sign, a large crack running down the length of it until it tapered off at the front doors. I shielded my eyes from a beam of sunlight that shone through the stained glass in the windows and rolled forward towards the doors. I curiously reached for these shiny little clumps that dangled from the old gourd vines that climbed the face of the house. Hundreds of thin insect-shaped bells clung to the vines, spotting the wall like Christmas lights. My grandmother called them cicada bells, the crunchy old skin the little buggers leave behind when they molt. The air was thick and humid. A scent like old bile traveled from somewhere close, and I suddenly felt like I was in a movie. My shirt stuck to my skin, and the back of my neck felt like a small flame had been lit against it. I was even more excited to step around the side of the house and see that the back wall had completely given way, a massive pile of old brick climbing up in a heap. Strips of old sheets swung from the banisters beneath the top floor, jutting out like the exposed ribs of a roadkill. They swung in the light breeze, lazily dancing above a blanket of forgotten junk on the ground. The empty living room and kitchen sat exposed to the forest, like the enclosure of a zoo. I studied the sun-bleached array of old chipped china and furniture. Several chairs and a love seat stood like they hadn't moved since they were brought in, the plush seats having been torn and nested in by rats and squirrels. In all of the memories that stood there in the Clark Castle, I felt a sense of dread. I saw all of it as a testament to time, to something inevitable. I know now that I should have left then, with that sorrow in my heart and shaken it off with a nice long sleep in my own bed. But standing against the mouldy wallpaper of the kitchen wall was a floral patterned crib. The finish on the wooden cage had been tarnished and worn away, and it splintered at the joints. An army of soggy vintage children's toys were gathered around the legs, staring up at me like I had interrupted a meeting. A yellow substance stuck like papier-mâché to the heads and arms of each toy, and dried streams of it dripped down the cradle bars. Toy soldiers stood with teddy bears, and the beady button eyes on all of them made the flame on the back of my neck burn hotter. From where I stood on the cracked foundation of the home, I could see just past the cradle's slats. I could see something peeking from the lip of the tattered pink blanket inside. A smooth, round object rested against a tiny old pillow. The sunken divots below the bulbous dome stared back at me, and I knew what I was looking at. I didn't want to be there anymore. I turned tail under a blanket of red sky. The sun finally muzzled behind the mountains in the west and leaving a crimson tarp in its wake. I must have taken the wrong step somewhere in that bolt and felt my foot get latched under a large root. I tripped over and down a decline and rolled towards a ravine. I don't remember that fall well, but I remember the cuts across my temple and the feeling of hot blood rushing down the side of my cranium. When I'd slid into a stop at the bottom, I felt rocks and wet leaves swallow my hands and shoulders, the pain in my head distracting me from what I'd come to realize was a twisted ankle and a couple of jammed fingers. This was the least of my worries. As my eyes refocused, my nose was immediately burnt with the thick, sweet smell of swamp and rot. I focused, my breaths deep and getting frantic. I stumbled to my feet and looked down to see the ruptured and broken body of a stag, face pointing at my own. The horns had been snapped and thrown somewhere to the side, and the legs were broken and tugged into disgusting angles. The head faced me, twisted around at a jagged tilt with its mouth open and tongue swollen. I stared down at the shoulder blades of the corpse and saw several palm-sized divots carved from its back, pounds of flesh missing between the teeth-marked circumference. The back half of its body was sheltered in the mouth of a large sewer outlet, swallowed by the dark inside. I saw a thick yellow syrup spill out from beneath the deer in a stream, dripping down onto the rocks below. I cursed, holding my hand to my head and marveling at the carnage in front of me. I had no idea there'd be animals out here that could do this. I thought back to the noises from the night before and shuddered to think that there might have been a mountain lion or a bear lurking between the pines, watching me as I sat on the porch. The same animal that could be right there with me. I wasted no time digging my Converse into the side of the hill and pulling myself back to the ruin, speeding off away from the Clark Castle. I smacked and pulled my way through the brush and let the odd thorns pull and tear at my skin as I breached the other side, feeling some sort of presence at my back. I felt the history of those old bones standing in the shape of a dilapidated house grow behind me, standing like the Colossus of Rhodes with a patchwork graveyard at its feet. My eyes went playing tricks on me. Even in the twilight haze, I knew what I saw behind the bars of that cradle, tucked like a sleeping child beneath an infant's blanket. The body left rotting in a pile of pine needles, the smell still wafting into my nostrils and curling my stomach as the rotted blood and viscera soaked into my clothes. I would call the sheriff, get a whole load of deputies in that old shack. That's what I'd do. They'd call animal control. Hell, maybe the National Guard to gun down whatever lived in there. I'd leave the little skeleton in the nursery to them. They would know what to do. And when the familiar outline of my double-wide trailer showed against the shadow at the end of the road, I pounded the soles of my shoes against the gravel to reach the cattle gate. That's exactly what I intended to do. At least until I stepped onto the porch and noticed that the front door was wide open. I put one foot in front of the other, slow and deliberately quiet. The carpet swallowed the bottoms of my bloody shoes as I pulled both arms back in the boxer's position. I must have looked terrifying enough, hair matted and clothes stained red. I hoped just the sight of me would at least make a mountain lion pause long enough for me to run outside and lock the door once I'd identified the intruder. The house was dark. A weird energy was silently clouding the space. When I breathed, I could feel it fill my lungs and fly through my veins. My spine felt like concrete. I wanted to scream. I was a grown man in my own home, scared like a child. I reached for a large kitchen knife from an open box of cooking utensils sitting by the door. Sword in hand, I braced myself as I stepped through the living room and into the hallway. A small noise bled softly out of the dark somewhere down the hall. Velvet consonants in open air, so small you'd think they were a child's. My hair stood on end as the whispers joined vowels and articulate words were pieced together in my mind. Blah, blah, blee, big sheep on black hills all go chewin'. I stared down the hall at the open bedroom door, knowing that someone was in my home now, and I was pissed with myself for not thinking to have brought my 9mm out on my walk, instead leaving it in the safe next to the bed. I was going to come down on this man like Muhammad Ali in a tight corner.
He was only just playing, Helen.
The whispers sung wet from the back of its throat, like tears would follow soon after. I put my weight on my back foot as I crept closer to the doorway.
He didn't mean to make you break, the baby.
I stood now before the vast dark space. In the shadow, the moon painted the walls a soft blue. I can still see it there, standing with its back towards me at the end of the bed. I said nothing, but it turned, shoulders low and its spindly frame twisted to let its eyes meet me in the dark. A stray beam of moonlight spilled onto its cheek. I saw the green of its pupils meet my gaze, a white face under short, soaking locks of black hair. A layer of oily film was pasted on its white cheeks, its neck arched. It was a man, I think. The body of it was too shaded to make out any detail. Not that I could get past its stare, anyway. I stared into the pale green eyes, stabbing through the dark like tiny jade rings. The face around it was pale and hairless. Its nose was small and its lips were parted in an O. I felt my heart freeze when words sputtered out of its mouth and drifted into my ears.
Oh, hello, Crow.
I hesitated, sure, but only to rear my arm back and launch the knife immediately toward the thing, the metallic glint shining in a streak against the bright moonlight. The thing bent back, and I watched as it effortlessly dodged the blade with an unnatural stretch before scuttling away and pulling itself out of the room through the open bedroom window. I watched its feet plant against the windowsill and grip the wood before letting go and slipping out into the night. I stood there in silence, my heart beating in my chest like the engine of a freight train. I stared out the open window, past the dark branches silhouetted against the bright moon. The wind picked up outside, whistling against the pine needles in the trees. My thoughts were faster than my brain could handle, and fresh sweat drifted down my forehead and over the congealed blood dried against my cheek. At my feet was one of Shane's toys, a Stretch Armstrong newly splattered with gunk where the thing had held it in its arms. Coming to my senses, I jumped to the safe, fumbling with the dial and feverishly grabbing my 9mm and a box of bullets beside it. I strode into the living room, slapping at every light switch on the way and sitting down at the table to load the gun. With the barrel loaded and the weight of it safely reassuring my hand, I felt my breaths come back slow. I was okay. Everything was okay. The bastard wasn't a robber. Just a weirdo who broke in and touched my son's toys, that's all. I kicked one of the other chairs over in anger, the day's hell having finally rested in my head and the fury building up inside. One breath passed, then another. I had no phone. It wouldn't be set up till the next afternoon. I had no car. Janice had taken it. Thank God Janice and Shane were far away, safely out of reach of this place. But that left me to deal with it. Then, I heard a sound on the roof. First there was one, then another, and then a constant stream. Constant, metallic ping sounds bouncing off the roof. I wiped at my face, pulling back the hammer on the hand cannon before getting up to the door and swinging it open. The cold air swam at me like a wave, and the door smacked against the inside with a bang. With the silver barrel of the gun pointed ahead of me, I stepped onto the yellow-lit porch. The noises on top of the roof had stopped, but so had the crickets. Now the vague scream of cicadas howled from somewhere in the forest. I watched the dark, seeing nothing in the yard. Then I looked down. A single solid bar of metal lay at my feet. The face of it was dusty and faded, but the golden hue shone from underneath in the porch light. I bent down slow, pulling the hefty little thing into my palm whilst the gun watched the scene ahead. The thing shone brighter as my thumb wiped the dust from its face, and I read the little letters stamped into it. I was holding a 1-pound gold bar in my hand. A voice called out from the blank.
Good day, Crow. You like it?
I didn't jump, but raised my gaze to the tree line and didn't answer. It amazed me how much like a child it sounded.
It's yours. Old money. For you if you want it.
I turned the gun to the direction I thought I heard the voice come from. Why don't you come out, man? I've called the police. You're trespassing, and you're going to be arrested. There wasn't a noise. I held the gun there and felt the weight start to strain my shoulder.
I want to try again. Not fail the first time. I want to try again.
The voice came from another 10 or so feet from where I had the gun pointed. I shouted back, "Come out!" But in the quiet few moments after, it didn't. I felt the question leave my mouth before I thought better of it. "Who are you?" There were smacking noises coming from it, like it was opening its throat.
You can make another one. You have the money now, and the payment has been set. You want Helen.
I leaned back and my face twisted in confusion. Deciding that he was a fine distance away, I slowly backed into the porch chair and sat down, keeping the gun trained whilst my wrist rested on the arm of the chair. "Come out!"
You'll come back.
The voice was wet and hasty, and the guttural squelch of every syllable made my arms erupt into goosebumps. The words echoed across the valley. The trees and bushes absorbed it, and I felt the vibration buzz in my chest. Maybe I let it get the better of me, and I wouldn't have done it if I was in a better state of mind, but I was pissed. Who the fuck is Helen, you weirdo? The voice didn't answer, and I heard shuffling in the branches. I figured we were stuck together anyway, at least until I could get another shot off and send the fella out down the road with a bullet in his ass. Till then, though, I could maybe humor him and get him in a nice enough position. I was told I didn't have any neighbors out here. What are you doing all the way out here? The voice croaked, now 20 feet to the left of where it had been.
I think I came up when the jar flies did. No one was home when I woke.
I knocked an eyebrow up. Is that so? That big mess at Clark Place is yours? It didn't answer immediately, but when it did, it was far too close for comfort.
I'll be taking what I came for. Unless you want to see the elephant, friend.
I scratched at my temple where a scab had begun to grow, and waved the gun to the stranger's new spot in the shadows. Well, I don't know what that is. Yes, I did. And you're not leaving here with shit. What are you, anyway? Are you some sort of crackhead? I've seen a few from where I'm from, and none of them have eyes like that. Suddenly, a vague shape stepped out of the dark. Footsteps so quiet, movements so silent that you'd think it was a ghost. The light barely met the front of it, glancing vaguely on its frame. It was standing at the gate, arms at its side. Those eyes, constant and piercing, stared back at me from its face. The lips were still, drops of drool drifting down from the corners of its mouth. I could make out a rigid and skinny pair of arms peeking out from a dirty set of overalls. Oily spots marking everywhere that it wasn't worn into threads. The fabric clung to its skin like it had crawled from a pool just moments before, and I saw puddles of fluid growing under its bare toes. I held the gun, pointed straight at him, and I couldn't pull the trigger. Not yet, not seeing that childlike mug staring back at me. But I didn't put it down, keeping it trained on the shape.
They didn't come back, I guess. Thought they'd only be gone a couple of days when they'd forgiven me.
I nudged my chin toward it and shook my head. Don't take one more step, pal. Don't test me with this gun, I'm a lawyer. It stood there quietly, not moving, its lips parted.
I'm being kind.
But I wasn't. My finger was flush against the arch behind the trigger before I'd even braced myself, and a deafening shot tore into the thing's chest and blew chunks of red flesh onto the gravel below. The thing leaned backward, but its feet didn't move. Its back arched away from the wound, but its face remained plain and unaffected. It was as if it hadn't happened at all. The glassy jades drift down to the palm-sized hole in its chest, the protruding ribs jutting out from the fabric of its shirt like teeth between gums. Then they slowly walk up the length of my body and up to my eyes. There's no twitch or curve in its lips. Its wet face is expressionless and curt. I didn't feel any anger or pain in it, and I hated the disconnection, like I was looking at a stone. It stepped back, still twisted in shock.
Daddy?
Frozen in its contorted pose, it stepped away from the light at an insane speed, not a stone or piece of dirt moving under its soaking feet before it was gone. I fired 2 more shots into the dark, hearing the wet splat sound of flesh ripping under the force of hot, fast steel. I remember feeling something dripping down my face, and I moved my hand against my forehead to feel cold sweat coming down the bridge of my nose. Suddenly I had the second to realize my heart was beating out of my chest, and whatever confidence I had in this territorial dispute was suddenly vacant now. I felt like a rabbit in a bear trap, like some ancient prey instinct had just been unlocked from an old memory in my DNA. I hadn't been scared, not when I thought it was only a man. But now, the situation seemed far beyond my ability to maneuver, and I wanted to be very far away very quickly. It took a slug and walked away without so much as a squeak, and it wanted my son. How could I let Janice come home in just a few hours? Would he still be there in the daytime? Was I dealing with some silly Bram Stoker pipe dream, or something without fairy tales that make up the rules? No, I told myself. It had to be crawling off somewhere to die. In the morning, I'd head out with the sheriff and find a crumpled body in the tall grass, and that would be it. Then I heard glass breaking. I turned the gun ready and strolled into the house, staring at everything visible under the electric yellow light. It was empty. I stomped my way into the bedroom, scared at the possibility of that thing jumping out at me and sinking those teeth into my skin. The window was shattered, the floor speckled with shards of glass. He'd done it, sure, but there was nowhere to hide in the light. Not after I flipped the mattress over and pointed the gun underneath the bed. I walked through the house, even turning over the cabinets before I stood there in the living room, absolutely bewildered. I sat at the kitchen table, the gun still readily available in my hand. I felt the call of exhaustion cloud my brain and shook it off, staring at every window and out the door, waiting for even a fraction of movement. Is this what I'd brought my family into? What fresh hell had I slipped the three of us into by taking this damn job? In the shining chrome of the pistol, my own face came back to me, distorted and warped, and yet still saw my own father in it. They couldn't come home to this. Not when I wasn't even sure the gun had done or could do any real damage to the damn thing. I resigned myself to the feeling, letting my attention fall away from the dark and feeling that familiar embrace of self-pity, letting it warm my shoulders. Until I heard a squeak. The lights fluttered, then shut off with a loud bang somewhere in the walls. Another tiny noise followed the last as something small fell onto the ground. I looked up. Two green eyes stared at me from the slats in the vent. Beady pupils dilated right at me. In shock, I yelped and stood, gun pointed straight at the vent. Two explosions rocked out from my hand cannon, and the vent plate exploded into ribbons of jagged shrapnel, but the black mass inside still slipped out all the same. A series of wet snapping sounds came out of the dark before I saw two legs carry the shape onto the floor.
Good day, Crow.
The last of my bullets met the hammer, and the explosion blasted my eardrums. A patch of drywall behind the thing's head disintegrated into a cloud of powder, but those damn eyes stared back all the same. I missed. The thing never blinked, looking on me with pupils the size of needleheads. The shadowed bulb of its head seemed to consider the barrel of the gun before lifting again to me. I heard a loud click sound, echoing somewhere in the dark. Then a stream of them came, blending together into a screaming stream. It sounded like a buzzsaw. I reached down to the dining table, wrapping my fingers around the wooden handle of my trusty kitchen knife. Maybe it was because I was already tired, stressed, or maybe it was because I knew this had to be fixed as soon as possible before my wife saw I made a new window in the ceiling of our new house. But I pulled the knife back. In a fraction of a second, I ran at the thing, screaming as I pushed the knife into its forehead and tackled it to the shag carpet. We slid down the hallway. All the while I could feel its sticky skin leaving a layer of gooey film on my own. I felt its body seize in my arms, writhing in place as hot bubbling yellow sputtered around the blade of the knife and into the open air. Its hands drifted to my cheeks, and I felt the tips of its fingers press into my skin until flesh parted and its fingers slid into muscle underneath. I screamed, its open mouth breathing stagnant air into my face. I struggled to my feet so as to not smell the disgusting sweet odor drifting out from between its thin lips any longer, feeling its fingers slip out of my face with a disgusting spurt of red blood. I looked down at the thing, watching one green eye drift away and up into its brain, while the other stayed dead set on my face and its body jittered and slapped against the ground. Its throat started to click again. The corners of its lips curved upward in a smile. I wiped at my face and watched as the head of the knife's handle that had skewered it through the forehead started to rise. I was in disbelief, seeing the silver face of the blade come visible under the strange webbed membrane it pulled out with it. The look in its eyes gave me the sickening impression that it wanted me to see this, that it was having fun. I spat on its face, slamming the heel of my shoe onto the back of the blade, and I felt the point plummeting into the carpeting. With my forearm, I smacked the bathroom door open and stepped inside. I wrenched the cabinet open, pulling a small box of Janice's various ointments and shampoos out and pulling a canister of hairspray against my chest. I looked down at the thing, pressing down on the nozzle of the can and watching a plume of mist kiss against the surface of the thing's body, and I didn't stop spraying until the damn thing was empty. I fumbled around in my jean pocket for my book of matches, feeling the thick paper packet on my palm, and frantically I snapped off a match and scraped it against the striker. Suddenly a glowing flame erupted from the red tip of the match and I smiled, pinning it against its friends in the packet, and feeling hot magnesium fire singe the flesh of my palm. The smell, in the moment, filled me with a sense of victory, I think. Especially when the bundle of orange flames fell onto the chest of the thing, and I watched its overalls ignite. The fire crawled from the fabric and onto its skin, soaking up the hairspray that clung to its arms and neck. Light danced against the thing's face, and its spasms worsened. The air outside was cool, and as the flames leapt out the windows of the double-wide shattered glass and wrinkling the steel, I remember smiling. The trailer roared with the sound of crisping fabric and wood, and in the warm red light I was finally able to breathe. Janice would be absolutely livid, and the sheriff might have to reschedule his dinner invitation in lieu of shoving me into the back of his patrol car. But finally, the woods felt a tiny bit more like home. And standing there, leaning against the fence gate, even now I'm in awe a little bit. When I first saw something moving through the windows, I thought it was nothing. It wasn't until I saw those shrimpy shoulders and that skinny frame stepping forward from the flames that I truly felt fear. One leg moved in front of the other, wrapped from head to foot in curling tongues of fire. When the nightmares came in the weeks after, they repeated that image to me like a tape on rewind. It stood on the porch, paused, then it walked down the steps, and I remember sifting through the fire around its face, searching for those stupid green eyes and that smirk. But there was only char and red-hot light. As its bare feet met the gravel, it simply stopped.
Right now. Go.
The voice was forced and grating. I heard each word simmer and sputter from its charcoal maw. I had nothing left to meet it with, no hope in hell to try again. I hate to think now that I would have just let it kill me, but hindsight is 20/20.
Me seeing you.
Then it walked away. Slow steps out through the tree line and into nothing. The smoke signaled its path above the tree line until it didn't. It was gone. It wasn't till I'd felt the soft touch on my shoulder that I woke up that morning. In that bright sunlight, I looked up to see Janice's face staring down at me. She helped me up from the dirt, touching my face and comforting me. Her eyes were bright and her skin was beautiful, and I just stared back in awe of her. On the car ride to the hospital, her words were worried and soft, and you couldn't hear a hint of anger in them. I remember she joked that I must have lost my mind, sitting there smiling at her like I was riding a high. In a way, I guess I was. Seeing her there, looking at the woman I loved as she argued with the nurses and held my hand in the hospital bed, it all finally made sense. I felt held, and I felt solid for the first time in a long time. The doctors asked their questions, and I gave them the same answer that I gave Grant when he sat across from me, pinching the crook of his nose with both eyes closed in frustration.
Hell of a housewarming party, Mr. Thornhill.
Sure was, buddy. I asked him about Clark Castle, about the people that had lived there. He just waved it off with the bottom of a cup of coffee slipping past his mustache. They were just some old family from an old time, that was all. They had built the house back when his grandpa was a kid. A wealthier family from the south had moved up and wanted to set up roots. A husband, a wife, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. They kept to themselves. Nobody liked them particularly. The family didn't last long. Something had gone on some years after the oldest had grown a bit, but nobody saw either before the parents picked up shop and shipped off. He said that his grandpa thought they were weirdos, seeing as nobody really saw them around town besides when the parents would pick up groceries or something like that. But that was old news now, he said. I asked him about missing folks, about vagrants and murders or anything else, but he said that the town was usually very quiet. Stuff like that only comes in waves, he said. They searched for the man for a couple of weeks, but never came up with anything besides that little skeleton in the cradle. When I was up and walking, I came down to the office, but the only thing they knew about it was that it was old. And that was that. But he had to hound me for a while afterwards when the insurance company sent a man down for the claim. I never did get that sorted out. It wasn't fulfilled, of course. Arson by the owner in case of self-defense isn't an easy case to win. But that was alright by me, seeing as that little gold bar was still sitting in my pocket. I found the process of selling it wasn't terribly hard, and 30 grand went a long way in 76. I did worry about the boy for a while, drove him to and home from school till he moved out and went to Eugene for college. Shane still believes me when I tell him someone broke into the home and burned the house down in a robbery gone bad. He grew up just fine, I think, and lives downtown in an apartment with my grandson. Janice is still beautiful, and is still giving me shit whenever she buys hairspray. I think she knew for a while that the whole thing bothered me. Little spats of nightmares would plague me for a few weeks afterwards. Hell, and that's when I wasn't up all night with the gun at the ready. But a year went by, and then another. She never told me she thought there might be more to the story, but I'll wager she absolutely knew. It was a kindness that she didn't ask too much. There wasn't much to argue about after that. Not a day went by that I wasn't just grateful that she was there, that Shane could sleep safe, that I had them. If it meant bending the knee whenever Janice got a parking ticket or forgot to iron a shirt, I'd happily do so. That's about it. I don't think about it often, but when I do, I get scared. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it died out there, and I would bet against it. The worst part of me believes it's just sleeping. It came up when the jar flies did, right? But it never came back, and that bothers me. I've seen kids go missing in the years since. Posters on the telephone poles. Shit, I joined a lot of those search parties. Always in the back of my mind were those eyes. I always expected to hear those words call out from the pines. Hello, Crow. But it didn't happen. They tore down the Clark Castle a few years ago. I was there, and I had been counting the days until I'd see that behemoth bulldozer knock those tattered walls back into the earth. Dust to dust. With it gone, surveying the ravine below, I do remember staring down at that big old drain pipe, just thinking about it. Maybe waiting to hear that cicada noise rip out of the dark. But things ended up okay. Lots of things go on all around, sure. But nothing happened to Janice, nothing happened to Shane. And that's what I chose to take away from it all. Go ahead and put this online if you want. I'm sure you've done some work changing names and stuff. Thanks for the therapy session, buddy. Afterward. Hello, Sam here. I was disappointed to find a general lack of record keeping with trying to sift through the town's census for all those years before Mr. Thornhill moved to town. He was right about the Clark Castle building. The building was torn down in 2018, and even then, it had been a shell of what it had been on that night of '76. I've taken a couple of drives out that way, and I've seen the ravine and the sewer outlet. It's unused, evidenced by the bone-dry soil underneath the drain. I thought about taking a flashlight and trying to look in there, but couldn't find any reason to do so. The person that attacked Mr. Thornhill was just a strange young man, right? There's no reason to go searching for something that shouldn't exist. Anyway, even if I did believe the Thornhill report and its quotes from the stranger, there's nothing on file about the Clark children, except maybe the littlest one. All those years after her family had abandoned their roost, shortly after that night, there appears to be only one update. I guess there was only one idea as to who that little body could have been. Little Helen Clark's body was buried in the Faraday Cemetery in 1977. Laid to rest, where her big brother may never hurt her again.